Hello, friends, and welcome to the March 17th edition of Weekly Witness, Texas Impact's weekly podcast designed to help mainstream Texans of faith understand the legislative process and help you engage with the Texas legislature. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and this week we welcome Texas Impact's Executive Director B. Moorhead and Advocacy Director Josh Houston to the program as we reach the midpoint of the 140-day legislative session. It has been a slow start to the session, but things definitely started ramping up this week. Because of that slow start, I think it's safe to say that the next few weeks will be busy with many opportunities to engage. We hope that you're prepared to make your telephone calls, legislative visits, and hope to see some of you at the Capitol giving testimony. It's been great seeing so many of you in person at the Capitol and on our Zoom calls for legislative engagement group members and Texas Impact teams. But now that the session's heating up, we all need to be ready to respond in real time. To find out how you can get involved, go to the Texas Impact Action Center at texasimpact.org. And y'all, I was reminded yesterday of the serious work we have in front of us. It's so great to watch public policy done right, and we saw that yesterday in a House committee who was hearing Representative Tony Rose's bipartisan maternal health bill, House Bill 12. There was real and substantive testimony on a bill designed to extend health coverage to 12 months for new moms. This is a bill that will save lives, and Texans of faith have been instrumental in advocating for this priority legislation. However, on the other side of the Capitol, a Senate committee heard several anti-trans bills, including Senate Bill 14, which led to harmful testimony of Christian nationalists shouting about pedophiles and perverts. Thankfully, there were two bishops in the gallery to speak to the harm that the legislation will do. And y'all, we will have opportunities to engage in real policy work, but there will be many more opportunities for Texans of faith and faith leaders to share a prophetic word in opposing harmful legislation. I hope that you're ready to engage over the next 70 days. And more, I hope you're already thinking now about the organizing work you can do post-session to encourage a legislature that is more willing to engage in thoughtful policy conversations that improve lives of real humans in our communities rather than sideshows meant to divide Texans and harm our neighbors. So with that, let's welcome to the program Texas Impact's Executive Director B. Moorhead and Advocacy Director Joshua Houston. Joining us for today's conversation is Texas Impact's Executive Director B. Moorhead and Advocacy Director Josh Houston. Hey, B. How Josh?
Hey,
Josh. How are y'all feeling?
How's it going, Scott?
Hey,
We're good.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fabulous, but based on our conversation leading up to this recording, I am hopeful that we can make it through in one piece. Josh, before we jump in, any thoughts on UT versus Eastern Carolina in the women's basketball tournament tomorrow night?
Yeah, I think we should be in pretty good shape for the first round. I'm looking forward to the game. We have tickets, and we're going to go.
All right. I know people who are tuning in really wanted to hear your thoughts on that before we got to the public policy. But that said, we are at the midpoint of the legislative session. I think this weekend will be at exactly 70 days remaining in the 140-day session. And you've been talking to our legislative engagement groups and all of our different groups about kind of the three different parts of the legislative session. And I think it's probably safe to say that the easy part is now in the rearview mirror. So remind us where we are on the calendar and what's coming next.
Yeah, so where we are is the bill filing deadline was a week ago last Friday. We are a week past the filing deadline, thank God. There will be very few new bills because there's always an exception to every rule, but for the most part, no new bills with few exceptions. We are now in the committee season, solidly in the committee season, and that is going to be the focus for probably the next month or so, is heavily on committees. And towards the end of the month, at the very end of March, we will begin to get into that volatile period once again where the seasons begin to change, and we'll start having more and more floor action going into Holy Week, and the budget is likely to be in early April. And so that period kind of gets turbulent again, where our routines get broken as we begin to shift back and forth between focusing on the floor and then focusing on committees and moving into that third season of the legislature.
And Josh has talked a couple of times about the first part of the legislative session being about relationship building. And I think that's both true for the legislators, but also for organizations like ours that are focused on membership and inviting people to come to the Capitol and preparing for the work that's going to come. We Texas Impact did have several big membership events over the first half of the legislative session. And I think it's fair to say that those were both well-attended and highly energetic. So what do you make of those events and the energy and enthusiasm that we're feeling early in the session?
I think the point's well taken that it is important to build relationships not just among the legislators, but among constituents as well. I think we've seen this year, maybe more than I can ever remember, that members of Texas Impact, so people out in local communities around the state, are hungry to know each other. They want to be in relationship with other people who are working on legislation, who care about what's going on in the state. And so our events were very energetic and successful, partly because the particular constellation of issues that's in front of the legislature has got people, kind of got everybody's adrenaline going. But I think also because what we're seeing is this hunger for people to interact with each other. And to me, that's very exciting and bodes very well for our democratic processes going forward.
I think there was that hunger. I agree that the first part of the legislative session, and folks were really eager to do something. But it did seem like it was a pretty slow start to the session. Is there anything that surprised you about the first 70 days?
Me?
Go for it.
There was a lot that surprised me about the first half of the session. I know Josh will talk about this too, but it is off to such a slow start. It took so long for everything to get going. A little bit that is because of the weather. There really was that 1 week where it kind of threw everybody off. I think we lost more than that week for the way that week played out, because travel was disrupted. People who needed to have meetings with each other in order to advance legislation couldn't get them done, so then that put that behind. So I don't think it's entirely any one cause that has made it get off to a slow start, but without question, we used that time effectively. We were able, because it got off to a slow start, to spend that much more time making sure that our members know what they need to know, have the resources that they need to have, and they will really need all that stuff, because the second half is going to be bananas.
Yeah, Josh, what do you make of that slow start? And anything else that surprised you in the first half?
Yeah, so when you look at the slow start, it's the House is mostly on pace. They always take a little longer to get going. The slow start is over in the Senate. And that is historically, Lieutenant Governor Patrick likes to just come out like a bull right out of the chute at a rodeo with a whole bunch of bills. And it's been a bit of a cautious start given comparing it to previous sessions. And you couple that with some very open in the press sniping at one another on Twitter and sniping at an event here in Austin at a local conservative foundation. And you look at the bill filings, 1 through 20 are speaker in the House are reserved as speaker bills. 1 through 30 in the Senate are reserved as lieutenant governor bills, just to evidence that that's the priorities. And the fact that there's just not a lot of agreement in the priorities. I mean, all that leads me to say the biggest surprise for me is the real lack of relationship that exists between the lieutenant governor and the speaker, and how that is going to play out over the next 70 days will reveal itself. But there's a real lack of relationship there that's going to lead to something. And we'll see exactly how that plays out in 70 days.
Well, something is certainly what we experienced yesterday. And for those who are listening later, we're recording this on Friday. And I talked in the open. Josh, you mentioned priority bills, and we certainly saw the difference in those priorities playing out yesterday in committee hearings. We were all watching along. Yesterday morning, we had one of Texas Impact's priority bills on the good side of the column. House Bill 12 was in the House, and this is a bipartisan maternal health bill that extends postpartum coverage for moms. So you saw that on the House side with a lot of agreement and some really great testimony, and everybody seeming to get along and do quality policy work. And then on the other side of the chamber, Senate Bill 14, which was the big anti-trans bill, which ended with shouting and all kinds of other harmful comments being made. Those hearings were certainly night and day. So what can we make of the difference in tone between those two hearings? And B, I guess we'll start with you.
I was going to say you should start with Josh.
Yeah, generally that evidence is a thing that we've talked about for a decade now between those two chambers. And to sum it up, generally the House as a whole wants to be productive. House Bill 12 represents a real point of agreement between the Speaker and his leadership team and, frankly, what you might call Speaker Democrats, Democrats that are more or a little more orientated towards making deals with the Speaker. And so it kind of represents a center of the state that says we can all agree on this and we can get this done and work in a productive way. But, and we need to talk about the buts. Yesterday in appropriations, there was a surprise amendment onto the budget bill. It's called a rider. It was a surprise rider that was tacked onto the budget bill. And it led to a big fight in the Appropriations Committee. And what it did was it prohibited the use of state funds going to so it prohibited the universities from having anything to do with diversity, equity, or inclusion. It basically prohibited it at state universities. And, whether it stays on or not is a good question. It creates general law, which you're not supposed to do in the budget, so it may not stay on. But what it evidences, regardless, is this attempt from the far right in the House to really hijack the process. And you could almost call them like the Lieutenant Governor's caucus in the House, where they really bring in that extremist politics into the House. And so what that then does is it pressures other Republicans because they're worried about a primary. And of course, 95% of the legislature is elected in the primary. So they're all far more worried about their primary than they are their general. And when that kind of thing happens, it then leads to another faction we should talk about in the Texas House, which is the Democrats that are not the Speaker Democrats. And they begin to ask the legitimate question, what are we getting from our deals? If the process keeps getting hijacked from the far right, what are we getting? Is 12 months postpartum depression really worth trading away armed vigilantes with a badge and immunity on HB 20, which I bet we talk about real soon? Is it worth, trading away the trans children and all their health care? Is it worth trading away vouchers in the public school system? Is it worth trading away the universities and tenure at the universities? Is it worth trading away renewables and renewable energy, of which Texas is actually a leader in nationally? Is it worth totally throwing our cities under the bus, where we take away all powers of local government except for a few things, which is really an assault on local democracy. And an assault on local democracy is really an assault on local voting rights. And so when you look at the big bad that is potentially out there, that's a legitimate question to say, what are we getting from our deals? And that is going to be the great big unknown delta that the Speaker is going to have to contend with over the next 70 days is how does he hold together a governing coalition? Can he hold together a governing coalition, and can the center hold as the Lieutenant Governor begins to, catapult really vicious legislation out of the Senate over at the House?
So, B, how do, Texas Impact has legislative priorities that include both killing harmful legislation, but also passing things like maternal health coverage. How do we as an organization balance that, and how do listeners kind of balance those competing interests?
I think the important thing for constituents, for voters to keep in mind, is that deal making is for legislators. It's not for constituents. So as a constituent, you're in, I guess, the enviable position of not needing to worry about what you would trade. Would you trade maternal health for whatever the thing is that you don't want?
Right.
Your job as a constituent is to stay true to your position on each of the issues, understanding that nobody gets everything they want, but you don't go into your advocacy saying, well, I would totally trade. And I heard someone bring that up in a conversation yesterday at the Capitol. Someone asked one of the bishops who was there to testify opposing the anti-trans bills, well, if the bill were amended in this way, would you take this deal? And the bishop gave a very sophisticated answer. But the real thing that constituents need to be prepared to say is, I don't have to make a deal. I'm here to tell you all of the things that I care about. The reason I elect you is to make good decisions that balance the competing interests of lots of people in the state.
Yeah, and so which issues, I guess, Texas Impact has a list of legislative priorities that was adopted last fall. Which priorities do you think we really need to be focusing on over the course of the next few weeks, now the legislative session is halfway through?
I think we need to focus on all of our priorities. If you're asking me which things I think need the most help, I will say, Josh and I will probably each give you an answer on this that might be the same or might not, but I think early on in the legislative session, I was saying it doesn't look like border and immigration stuff is as on fire as some of the other things, but I think everybody needs to stay really prepared because something is coming. And I am sorry to say, I think that's exactly what happened. The House Bill 20 that got filed on the last day of bill filing is a really sincerely bad bill. And it is part of a really sincerely bad movement in our state, but I would say in our country that is it is isolationist and anti-foreign, and it's related to a lot of other bills, some of them that don't necessarily have to do with the Texas-Mexico border. We are now trying to prevent people from various countries from owning property in Texas. We're trying to make relationships with other states that share our distaste as a state for migrants. These are all really, really scary developments in kind of culture and policy. And those things, I think, eventually are going to be the problems that people are talking about in the national news that are going to be after everyone has gotten their property tax, their $25 property tax cut or whatever it is that it ends up being. After we've done all of the individual budget items, those immigration bills are going to be, if any of that stuff passes, that's going to be a problem in our country for a long time.
Yeah. Obviously, all of our priorities are still our priorities. And as Josh says often on the legislative update calls, nothing is dead until sine die. But that said, Josh, anything you're particularly watching at the midpoint here?
I hate to say all of it, but in a sense that we're at that point in session where it is not yet clear. What is coming has not yet revealed itself.
Right.
And so what I would urge people to pay attention to is that they're paying attention. And it's going to be very hard to watch over the next 70 days things like what we saw last night, which was a very wealthy Houston doctor that is deeply involved in our state's politics, named Steve Hotze, calling people pedophiles and groomers and staring people down to intimidate them at the witness stand during a committee hearing. That kind of rhetoric is just like drinking poison daily. And so it's going to be very tempting to tune it out. It's going to be very tempting to say to people like me, oh, Josh, I'm so glad you're doing this work. I don't know how you do it. And, I'm glad you're watching so we don't have to. It's like, wait, no, stop. There might have been a time when I was the fact witness and you were the jury, and there was this case being put on, metaphorically speaking, that is the legislative process. But that's not true anymore. We are all fact witnesses. And like a trial, we citizens of a democracy are not going to be able to hold them accountable unless we have witnesses to what happened to evidence what has occurred over the next 70 days. Because we will get through the next 70 days one way or another. They're going to pass, and we're going to have to hold folks accountable. And if we don't watch very carefully what happens over the next 70 days, we're not going to be ready to do the work of citizens of a democracy over the next 570 that occur. In fact, it's even less than that before the next legislative session. It's really 10 months until the March primary, the primary that elects 95% of the people in the legislature that are doing what they're doing right now.
I want to add on to that I heard someone say something yesterday that I think should be the mantra for everybody, for all of Texas Impact members, certainly. Ricardo Martinez, who's the executive director of Equality Texas, said in his rally with folks who were coming to testify against those anti-trans bills, he said, silence has not kept us safe. I think that's what everyone needs to remember, and not just on that issue after issue after issue over a long period of time. I've been working in the legislative process for 30 years this year. And there's always this part where people say, well, if everybody will just sort of sit back and, don't be too aggressive, don't ratchet your rhetoric down, we're going to get this worked out, we all need to make compromises, all of those things. Silence has not kept anyone safe. People sitting back and waiting for the legislature to get itself centered. Surely they won't really do fill in the blank legislation. Surely you won't get as bad as all that. You don't want to say the sky is falling. All of the things that people said, gosh, it'd be terrible if that happened, but that would never really happen in our state, that they have. So everybody should take note and understand being silent, waiting for the other shoe to drop is not gonna benefit anybody. It's not like you can mess it up and ruin the deal by speaking your mind. You're not going to ruin any deal by speaking your mind. And if your relationships are real, you're not going to ruin your relationships by speaking your mind. Now is not a time to hang back and just be polite.
I see our producer, David, scribbling notes for the episode title for this episode. So thanks, B, for that. Do want to ask one last question. I'm going to break it into two parts because I know I'm looking at Josh right now. I know he will immediately want to answer the second part of the question. But I think the question is related to silence not keeping us safe. What are the ways over the course of the next 70 days that you hope listeners will speak up? And the second part of that question, which we'll wait for, Josh, is how should that relate to work that takes place during the next 500 and something days? But what do y'all hope folks will be doing over the next 70 days during the close of the legislative session?
I'll tell you what I hope people will be doing, and it is especially after watching the hearings that we watched yesterday, where we heard, we've said several times now, we heard really distressing testimony and really distressing interactions with legislators in the Senate State Affairs hearing on the anti-trans legislation. We also heard amazing testimony. It was some of the most enchanting testimony I've ever heard from a public witness in a hearing on House Bill 12, Tony Rose's bill, Representative Rose's bill on postpartum coverage, from our colleague Emily Bourgeois from the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. It was so beautiful the way that she articulated why the Jewish community prioritizes maternal health and how they characterize the importance of the mother and the health of the mother in the community. It was wonderful. And Tony Rose, the representative herself, asked Emily to repeat it because she herself wanted to hear it. Again, hearing what people say is really important. We have Leg TV, our legislative clips that we try to pull out important things that legislators say and that people who are testifying say. We try to make sure that we're putting that stuff on social media. If people hear things in their own travels that they think are worthy of other people hearing, they should put those things out there too. There's no substitute for hearing it with your own ears. And what Josh said is so important, and I'll confess, made me kind of take a deep breath. It made my heart drop a little bit when he said, it's 10 months until the primary. Well, that means right now is when legislators are saying the words people should be thinking of when they are going in to vote. Right now is when you should hear what your legislator is saying. If they are saying things that are life-affirming, that make you proud of them, that make you at least even understand their perspectives. We've had legislators who are not necessarily on the same side of all of Texas impacts issues at all. Senator Birdwell last week made some really important statements about the importance of conscience. It was great to hear that. And then also we've heard legislators say some really shocking things. Constituents need to hear those words, not just the words that you would say if you were trying to be elected.
Well, in one of the events, I can't even remember which one it was now, but I made a comment this week that by virtue of coming to the Capitol and being a part of this event, and I'd say probably expand that to listeners of this program, you are an expert, right? You are more plugged in and more informed than most of the people in your congregation, most of the people in your community. And I saw several people in the room like light up like, whoa, that's surprising. But I believe it. And I think, Josh, you said something a few minutes ago about you are witnesses to what is happening. And an important part of being a witness to what's happening in the Capitol right now is testifying to the rest of the community leading into election season. It's one of the reasons we send people on courts and porch trips is so they can experience what's happening at the border and report back to their community. So what do you hope people will be doing with the information from this legislative session when they go back home?
I sat in a different hearing, I guess it was on Wednesday, and it was talking a lot about local government and local government's authority. And, we had the blackout here in Austin, the second one, not Winter Storm Uri, but then the second one from the ice storm at the beginning of this session. And, my family sat in the dark for about 126 hours, which, well, I guess we didn't sit in the dark. We got forcibly evicted and stayed with friends that had power, but nevertheless, 126 hours without power. And there are some bills that would, the legislature is going to come in and tell the city of Austin how to do better. We don't need that level of preemption. I'm the aggrieved party, and the city of Austin is lucky enough to own our own utility. I don't need the state legislature coming in because I don't trust that the people that represent Port Arthur or Amarillo or El Paso or Dallas really give a rip about the city of Austin. I'm looking forward to holding my city council officials accountable at the ballot box at a local level of local democracy. I'm looking forward to getting reinvested in my neighborhood association, which about 17 years ago said, don't trim the trees. Don't cut my trees, don't cut my trees. You're butchering the trees, Austin Energy. And so the city council responded and said, hey, cut back on the tree trimming. And we all sat in the dark for 126 hours because of the trees. So I'm recommitted to getting deeply involved in my local democracy. So the last thing that I want is for the state legislature to come in and preempt all that and do it for me, because at the end of the day, we have 5 legislators from the city of Austin, I think, maybe 6 now. I can't remember exactly how those lines are drawn, but that's the point, right? I mean, the lines don't correspond in any way to the cities. So 5 out of 150, or a city council that actually represents us. I'd much rather handle this. This is a local issue for local voters. Don't need the state legislature involved at all. So I really hope people recommit to their local communities, which doesn't just include city councils, but county commissions and school boards. And those elections are not 10 months away. They're 2 months away, in fact, less than 2 months away. Now, not everybody's in May. Some are in May, some are in November, some are in even-numbered years, some are in odd-numbered years. It's really on you to find that out. But local democracy works best. It's where your vote is most potent. It's where you know what's going on because it most affects your community, and we have largely ignored it for too long at our own peril, and we may be on the verge of losing it real soon. So I hope we all recommit to local government and local democracy and our local voting rights.
I hope we do engage locally, but I also know that there are going to be people who are going to be at the Capitol, who are going to be making telephone calls, who are going to be disappointed with outcomes this legislative session. Spoiler alert, we're probably not going to get everything we want. And my hope is that if you're listening and get frustrated, your response isn't to check out, but it's to re-engage your communities and to let people in your congregation and community know what's happening, because most people aren't paying attention to what's happening at the Texas Capitol. So it's on us, it's on you to tell that story and to start organizing your people to do something different next time, to try to find elected representatives who want to engage in serious conversations about House Bill 12 and not yell about trans kids from a microphone in the Capitol. We need to be engaging in serious policy conversations, and we're not going to do that unless the folks who are paying attention get frustrated enough to tell their story and to get their friends to come with them to do that. Josh, anything else? Any closing thoughts today before we close out this episode?
No, I guess I want to say, as I'm sitting here reflecting on the conversation that we've just had, I feel like, man, that's kind of a downer. I don't know if I would have stayed and listened to the whole thing. I hope people did listen to the whole thing. And also, I want to say, I hope people don't take away from this conversation that it's all a downer and the most important thing is to just make it through. The legislative process is always complicated. It's always challenging in different ways. I actually think this session, I'm more excited than I have been in a long time. Not so much about what's going on inside the Capitol, because that is a little bit of a train wreck, but what's going on among our members within the faith community in Texas is very exciting to me. We are seeing more and more people more and more interested in getting involved, and that is good news. And as long as everyone is committed for the long term, which as far as I can see they are, I think the future probably looks brighter than the present.
Yes. And since we usually have shameless plugs at the end, and it's all us now, I will just remind y'all to get involved. The teams that we have meeting are doing some great work. The legislative engagement groups have been a joy for our Monday meetings. So make sure you're signed up for all of the different opportunities. Go to texasimpact.org, click on Action Center, and get involved because there is work to do. Josh, anything you have before we close out? Excellent. You could at least give him a hook 'em horns, go Lady Longhorns in the NCAA tournament. He's holding his horns up. We'll watch for Josh in the stands at the NCAA tournament game this weekend. With that, Josh, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Scott.
Thanks, Scott.
I'd like to thank B and Josh for joining us, but I especially want to thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and are ready to get to work at the Texas Capitol to raise issues important to our families and communities. We look forward to resourcing your advocacy, and I'm happy to try my best to answer your questions, so feel free to reach out at scott@texasimpact.org. As we wrap up, make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast and are sharing it with your friends and congregations, and go to texasimpact.org for other ways you can get involved during the legislative session. While you're there, make sure that you and your congregation sign up to be members of Texas Impact to support this podcast and the work of Texas Impact year-round. And with that, I think it's time to close out this episode, so remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's get to work.
Weekly Witness is hosted by Scott Atnet, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.